What's up, everybody? We're here with some UFC DFS picks, lineup advice, FanDuel, and DraftKings, UFC Vegas 19. I think that's what they're calling it now. Blaydes versus Lewis. What's up, everybody? We're going to be here for about 30 minutes, breaking down the slate, FanDuel, and DraftKings, talking about our favorite plays, discussing and dissecting the main event, talk about some UFC newcomers on the scene here, discuss some fights that we want to target and some of our low-owned plays that we want to target for our tournament lineups. So what's up? Welcome to everybody in here. Say what's up in the chat. I'm Brian Juster, co-founder, co-host here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake McIntyre of MMADFS.com. Jake, what's happening, man?
Not a whole lot, man. How you doing?
I'm good. I got to be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed. It's a 14-fight slate. We're used to cancellations and everything else possibly going wrong. Only one fight canceled this time around, so we got 14 fights, and I know you had a busy week yourself breaking down all 14 of them. Hell, you broke down 15 and they almost canceled.
Yeah, man, it's a grind breaking down 30 different fighters over the course of like 5 days, man. It's a lot of work.
It is. Yeah, I don't envy your work at all, but we're all glad that you do it. So you can check out Jake's work at MMADFS.com. Check out The Sheet, where he breaks down every single fight on the slate and talks about the betting and DFS implications. Jake also turns that work into the top plays and lineup strategies for the MMA Daily Plug at OccupyFantasy.com for members only. Link is in the description below. Our Occupy model is up and running now, ranking every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings with projected ownership. All the tools you need to be successful for tonight's UFC DFS slate. So, Jake, as we jump into it, actually, before we jump into it, as people are coming into the live stream now, as you're watching this, if you like what you see, go ahead and click that subscribe button below. Get notified when all of our live streams and videos start and are uploaded. Give us a thumbs up. We always appreciate that. And we have a set schedule that we're going to talk about here for the next 30 minutes. But if you have any questions, just hop in the chat, interrupt us, and we'll stop and answer them. So, Jake, I want to first talk to you about the main event. So we got Blaydes versus Lewis, and we've seen some main events in the past where you have to have one side or the other in all of your lineups. But being a heavyweight fight, being a pretty big favorite here, what are your thoughts on this main event as a whole and the requirement to have one of these fighters in our high-risk lineups?
Yeah, so I think first of all, you don't have to have one of them in there. I think the odds of it ending in the first round are actually not that high, which normally for a main event they would be. So that already takes away a little bit of the ceiling potential performance. And then the other thing that kind of limits the ceiling is I don't think it goes the full distance like Blaydes' last fight did, where he racked up 14 takedowns and set the all-time heavyweight record. So
Yeah.
I think we're more likely to see a mid-round finish, which potentially could be a little bit lower scoring. If it comes like early third round, I mean, he could score like 80 or 90 points maybe. I mean, if it comes late second round, maybe it still scores, 110, 120 points. So, I mean, there are ways it does well, and there are definitely ways it busts. So I think that maybe having it in like 2/3 of your lineups, something like that, like 2/3, 3/4 max. I think that's kind of what I'm looking at for it. But I mean, Blaydes has shown a huge ceiling, so I mean, he always has the potential to break a slate.
Yeah, and there are two things working against him on this particular slate. One, the fact that there are 13 other fights to potentially outscore him. If he does if he has a typical performance and scores 105, 110, maybe that gets there on in all likelihood that gets there on a 9, 10, 11 fight slate. 14 fights, certainly chances to be outscored. And then secondly, it's as a result of the money line, his pricing, 9,400, most expensive fighter on DraftKings, he could get priced out of the optimal lineup. So that certainly plays a factor as well. What about Lewis? Are you thinking about playing him at all? Is there any scenario where you're playing him?
I'm not really on him, man. I'm gonna be honest. Like, I think Vegas is giving him like a 22% chance to win the fight, and if you ask me, I mean, give me the under on that. I think that seems high. I think he probably has like a 10% chance of landing like a lucky KO. But I mean, so far we've seen one man on Earth knock out Blaydes, and that was Francis Ngannou,
And
who
he's a
did it
bad man.
twice. Yeah, he's a bad man. I mean, it's not just like some random dude knocked him out. I mean, that's the only person to do it. I
Yeah.
don't think Lewis gets it done.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like you just said it. Lewis, not only does he have to knock him out, he's not going to grind out a decision here despite whatever long shot the odds say are possible, but he has to knock him out in a timely fashion, right? Like he can't luck out and get a third round KO, and he still might not hit the optimal lineup that way, especially if Blaydes is dominating him for the first 2 rounds. So it's a really tricky spot for him. Really, really tricky spot. So, all right, guys, we'll be here till 3:30. The time has got me off here. We have the 5 p.m. Eastern slate lock. We'll be here till 3:30 Eastern. Jake and Brian, MMADFS.com, OccupyFantasy.com. And let's see, we got a couple questions in the chat, and guys, we will get to your questions. 10 Cent Poker says Blaydes ownership is insane. Yeah, I mean, Jake, 65% roughly you have projected for Blaydes. I think I'm going under in my 150 just because of the reasons we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might be a little bit under that as well. Like initially, I was kind of like, oh yeah, Blaydes, lock him in, and then you start looking at all the other good options that can score high, and there's a lot of people that can outscore him on the slate that are priced below him. So yeah, I think being slightly under is probably the move.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree there. All right, let's jump into it. Again, 14 fight slate, and one of the first things I look at when we have a UFC slate early in the week, because we have to chart some data for the back end of the model. You obviously have to chart all the fights for the sheet that you write. And when we have newcomers, it's a great opportunity because there's no tape, no data for people to go off of no existing FanDuel or DraftKings scores. So generally some edges there, but it also requires a lot more work on our end because one, we have to find the damn tape to chart these fighters. And then two, we actually have to put in the work to chart them. So 3 fighters on this slate are making their UFC debut. And Jake, we have some interesting options, right? So we have Casey O'Neill, the King. We have Draco Rodriguez, and then Vandera at the low end of the salary range. Talk to me about these 3 fighters and your outlook on this particular slate.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are 3 great options. I mean, O'Neill might be my favorite play on the slate. I know you like her as well. I mean, she looks like she could come in and be an immediate flyweight contender. I mean, I would almost say like she could be a top 5 like after this fight, which might be
that's high
might be
praise.
rushing it.
But she's good, man. She's really good in a lot of areas.
She is. Yeah, for sure, man. She's a beast standing up. She just controls people on the ground. I mean, she's got a lot going for her, and I don't see many weaknesses in her game. She only has 5 pro fights. She won all 5 of them. Her dad was actually like the owner of the promotion she fought under in Australia, and he was also like a pro fighter. Which at first I was like, wait, her dad was the owner? But then it's like, all right, so she's been training since like she was born pretty much. So I mean,
he's just like sliding her the easiest fights as the owner of the promotion.
Right. I mean, that was my initial concern. Like she won the belt and her dad's the owner of the promotion. I'm like, all right, this could be a little sketchy, but she looks legit. You know, I came in like kind of skeptical, and then I watched her and I was like, all right, she's actually kind of a badass. So yeah. I think she's gonna really look good. I mean, I think she's kind of the safest play in the slate, other than maybe Blaydes in terms of winning. But then my boy Draco. I was really high on him, actually now, but also when he was supposed to fight. I think it was like back in December when this fight was originally supposed to happen, but his opponent got COVID. But I was really high on him, and then he comes in and doesn't look great at weigh-ins, misses weight, and I mean, he has me a little bit nervous, but I'm still pretty high. I mean, I still have a good amount. But it's always a little worrisome when, you know, you're high in a guy and then they show up for weigh-ins, overweight, and just not looking especially great. But his opponent's coming off a super long layoff. It's the last fight of his contract. He's lost his last 2 matches. He just doesn't really seem motivated to be in the UFC. And then Draco comes in 7-1. I think he has like 6 finishes, 5 in the first round. He's only lost 1 fight. I mean, he looked good. Like, we have limited tape on him because he, it's just hard to find, and he hasn't had a UFC fight yet, but he looked really good. And then Vandera, he's just a big guy. You know, he's a big heavyweight. 10 of his 11 wins have come early. He can wrestle. He can get knockouts. He just seems like the type of guy that could score well on DraftKings as long as he can stay off his back, which is always a potential concern with Spivak. But I think he's live too, man. I like all 3 of these guys.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Vandera, obviously he's an underdog, but that helps his pricing. He's super cheap on FanDuel, super cheap on DraftKings, and when we're looking for those bottom-of-the-barrel fighters, Believe me, I'd much rather play a guy who we don't know their floor and ceiling versus a guy who's shown to have a really low floor and a really low ceiling in historical UFC fights. But again, all three of these fighters look to be solid options for DFS today. All right,
For
moving
sure.
along here. Again, we're live till 3:30. Jake from MMADFS.com. I'm Brian from Occupy Fantasy. The Daily Plug, Occupy Model, the sheet is all up and running. Links are in the description below if you're watching this live on YouTube. To go check it out for everything you need for today's slate. Jake, before we jump to the next section here, I did want to talk to you about the fact that it is a 14-game slate. And you've been collecting data for DraftKings, a little bit on FanDuel as well. And for those who are out there playing the big GPPs, no matter what advice we tell you about contest selection, people are going to play the big GPPs. And as if you've watched these streams before, if you read the lineup strategy section of the Daily Plug, you know that leaving salary on the table is an option. And if you leave more than $1,000 in the big DraftKings GPP, it's a great way to be unique. But Jake, since you've been charting 10 of the 11 slates with 12 or more fights, have used at least 49,000 of the DraftKings salary cap. And I think that kind of plays to the point that there are just so many options that it's kind of hard to get, a lot of salary left over when there are so many fights.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you have less fights, you only need a couple guys to bust. But, when we have 14, 15 fights, you need a lot of guys to bust to be able to leave 1,000, 2,000 on the table. So we've seen these bigger slates, less money has ended up winning these slates. So, I mean, I can just look at a couple. So the last one was actually not long ago. It was January 20th. It was a 14-fight card. And the winning lineup left 300 on the table, and it ended up being a 6-way split. So I mean, it was a small split, but not a ton of people. And then the last 14-fight card before that was back in September, and that one left $200 on the table on DraftKings, and that was a 4-way split. So I mean, normally if you want to be unique, you have to leave a little bit more on the table. But on these big slates, there's so many fight options that it's hard to do that, and you're not going to split with 100, 200 people, even if you only leave two or 300 on the table. So it's not that big a deal unless you're like super anal about not splitting with anybody and not sharing any of your prize money. But you'd rather have a 4-way split than not win. So
right. And the fact is, there's so many less than 20% owned fighters that we can play today, and we'll talk about those here in a second.
Right.
Sam H in the chat, what's up, Sam? He says, do you guys prefer Vandera to Kunitskaya at minimum price on FanDuel and low risk? Jake, what's your thought there?
On FanDuel, yeah, I think Yana I think Yana is a much better DraftKings play because she gets more control time than Kamaru Usman on average, just to give you an idea. Yeah, it's like 55%. Usman's like 50, 51. And she racks up a ton of strikes in the clinch. So she's like built for the new scoring system on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, I think she's going to struggle a little bit more. So on FanDuel, I would go away from her and go with Vandera.
Yeah, plus Vandera will get credit for the takedown defenses, which we expect to see some takedowns attempted against him with Spivak. So, I think we both agree that Vandera is the guy there, Sam. All right, Jake, moving on to our next section here, fights to target. Especially if we're making a limited set of lineups. There are always a handful of fights each slate that we think whoever wins has a really good chance of being in the optimal lineup. Talk to me about some of these fights that you're targeting today.
Yeah, I think there's several where we're kind of like, all right, you got to have both sides of this fight, opposed to sometimes we're just like, yeah, you want to target one side. So I think the Hawes-Imavov fight, Hawes has never been to a third round. Imavov's a finisher himself. I think that one has a great chance to end early. Vegas agrees. I think it's like the third most likely to end early on the whole card. So, one of those two very likely ends up in the optimal, and they're priced at 8,000 and 8,200. So even if they score like in the mid 90s, maybe that's still enough. Like maybe they don't need 130-point performance to make the optimal, because they're also both value plays. And then another one's going to be a Rosa Landwehr. That sets up as the highest volume striking fight on the slate. So, again, that's another one. They're both priced at 8,100 on DraftKings. They're $15 and $16 on FanDuel. So great chance we just see a ton of strikes. Rosa also has a ground game, and Landwehr can score off of takedowns defended. So I think both of those guys have the potential to score well. It's just, trying to figure out who's going to win it. Both of them are coming off absolute brawls. Rosa scored better. He got a third-round finish over Sean Woodson when he was like the biggest underdog on the slate, and just ruined everyone's day that day. So
Some man's lineups have ruined others' lineups. We're not.
You want to be on the right side of that. I'm guessing you were probably on the right side.
Basically, anytime somebody who is very low owned wins, it's a good thing for me. So
yeah, exactly. And then we got a couple more. We got Spivak Bandera. We kind of talked about both those guys are heavyweight grapplers, so they have the potential to get takedowns defended, control time, strikes in the clinch. Spivak lands a ton of total strikes whenever he gets takedowns that don't register as significant. So he's generally, I would say, better on DraftKings, although he did have a massive FanDuel performance when he landed 6 takedowns and got a round 2 submission. I think it was his second pro fight against Tua to whatever.
You got it. Just power through it.
Yeah, nailed it. And then Rosa Minner. That one was an interesting one. I wrote up kind of how like every fight Rosa is in is like a terrible fight for DFS because he's just like a low volume guy that isn't involved in many finishes. I think every fight he's ever been in the UFC except for one made it to the 3rd round. And then he's going up against the complete opposite in Minner, who basically all he does is go for round 1 submissions. He has like 23 finishes, 22 are by submission. I mean, he's just a round 1 submission machine. I mean, so it's kind of a weird fight between two guys on the opposite end of the spectrum, but they're both submission guys. Interestingly, Rosa had like really bad neck surgery like a few years ago, and Minner is a guillotine specialist. So we might see someone get decapitated today. But
matchmaker said, you know what? Let's pair him up with the worst possible opponent.
And then on the other side of things, Minner's like weakest thing is he keeps getting armbarred, and Rosa is an armbar specialist. So like both guys are. It'll be interesting how they take advantage of the weakness of the other one. But yeah, there was definitely like some cackling going on in the matchmaking on that one. They're like in a dark room. Yeah, right. Dark room, smoking cigars, like someone's going to die here. And then the last one that I think you also probably want to target is Dawkins Olenek, just because both those guys, all their fights seem to end in the first 2 rounds. And, Dawkins is 8,600 and Olenek is 7,600. But it seems like the winner of that, there's a very good chance they end up in the optimal too, because that probably ends in the first half of the fight.
Yeah, I could see that, and the odds suggest that as well. And before we move on to the next section, I do want to make a comparison here because there are 2 fighters on this slate that are very comparable as far as their history, the type of opponent they're facing, and it's Dawkins and Aspinall, right? Like these 2 guys both have had a couple fights in the UFC under their belt. Both have faced, let's be honest, pretty terrible competition, and now they're fighting UFC veterans. Aspinall against who's Aspinall facing?
Arlovsky.
Yeah, Arlovsky, and then we got Dawkins against Olenek. So really, these guys, they're both 2, Dawkins and Aspinall, are in the top 4 projected ownership for us. But Jake, this is a letdown spot for both of these guys just based on who they have faced, what their DraftKings scoring sheets say, and the likelihood that their opponent can maybe grind them out more than these trash cans they've been facing.
Yeah, man, it is an interesting spot for both of them. I think Arlovsky is kind of calmed down in his past 5 years. He used to get knocked out more, but 10 of his last 11 fights have ended in decisions. He seems like more cautious. He even kind of talked about it after his last fight. Like, I just need to listen to the coaches and not lead in with my chin, So he's kind of
good strategy.
This guy, he went pro when Aspinall was 5 years old. So I mean, he's been around for a while, and he has enough experience that you would think that, going against the guy making his 3rd UFC fight, he's not just gonna charge in there and just get knocked out in the first 45 seconds like Aspinall's last, 6 opponents or whatever.
Right. So, Jake, Derek in the chat says Pena and Close has been canceled. Let's see if we can get confirmation on that. You can look on your end, but that would take us down to 13 fights and honestly give us a little less options. And I know you weren't that excited about either one of those fighters, right? That entire fight.
Yeah, I mean, that was the least exciting fight on the slate, unless you were betting it to go to decision, which I was.
So yeah, we'll work to get confirmation on Pena and Close. But again, both guys were projected just under 20% ownership on DraftKings. So not much will change as far as ownership projections there. They'll be spread out to other fighters in their salary ranges. But thanks, Derek, for pointing that out to us as we're live here on stream. So Let's move on to the next section. And Jake, speaking of low-owned fighters, we try to find at least two to fit into all of our tournament lineups. And again, it's never easy. You have to have the stomach to fit in fighters who don't look good on paper, but we have to play. GPP theory says we have to play these low-owned fighters, 20% owned or less. Who are some fighters that you're targeting that the field's overlooking that you think can be high scores?
Yeah, so I think there's a few kind of right on the threshold. We have projections. They could be off by a few percent. And if the threshold's 20, these people could be 19. They could be 21. But if we're talking about guys that are close, I think O'Neal and Draco and Vendera that we already talked about are all going to be, right around the low 20s, high teens. And they're all great options, especially if you combine a couple. Then, you're even a little bit more unique. Some other guys that I think that are going to be low owned that I like are Wineland. His last 4 wins have all come by KO, and now he gets a guy making his second UFC fight. I mean, Wineland is basically a one-dimensional power puncher, but he's always good for a KO. And then Kaniskia.
Really quickly, Wineland looks like a one-dimensional power puncher from the 20s.
Yeah, no, he totally does. He's got like the curled up mustache. Like he kind of walks around like a robot. Like I don't even know if he can like turn his hips. Like, yeah, he probably like chugs a beer right before he goes out there and then like smokes a cigar afterwards. But he's pretty ridiculous.
He needed both of those after his last fight.
Oh my God. Yeah. Everyone remembers like that mustache curling KO against Sean O'Malley where he just got like, literally he's just like looking up at the stars. Like you could see the birds going around his head like after he got knocked out. I mean, that was probably one of the craziest knockouts we've seen in a long time. And O'Malley just like hit him one time and walked off. I mean, it was, and then of course O'Malley lost his next fight, but we haven't seen Wineland since then. So, I mean, either he's completely washed, he has no chin, he's done, and he's going to look like a bum and disappoint us, or he's going to bounce back. He takes on a big step down in competition, and great shot for a KO, in my opinion. I mean, I think his inside the distance line is like plus 375, so I mean, it's just kind of average, but he's either going to get a KO or he's not going to score well. But I mean, that's kind of what you're looking for in some of these low-owned guys. Just like, do you have a shot to put up, 110, 115 DraftKings points and surprise people with a KO? Or do you bust, and that's why we didn't play a ton of you anyways.
Right.
But then we got Yana Kaniskia, who we already talked about a little bit. She could just rack up control time. Vieira actually missed weight, so that's always a red flag. She came in at 138 pounds, so 2 pounds over the limit. Typically, Vieira has been a beast, and she only has 1 loss, and it came on a round 1 KO against Aldana. So it's not a great spot, but Kunitska has been consistent, so I mean she's almost min-priced. She's the second cheapest after Derek Lewis. If she does win, which I think the odds say she has like a 30% chance, she's scored really well in her decisions. So I mean she's the potential to kind of surprise people with her score, even in a decision. She doesn't need a finish.
Right. Well, that's the thing you have to think about too, right? People will look at the matchup and say, well, how does she? I mean, she can't beat Vieira. She can beat her, right? And just think about what is her path to victory. How does that look? If she wins, it's either a knockout somehow, or she wins her type of fight, which has historically scored well in DraftKings. So even though she's super cheap and a big underdog against a tough opponent, you got to think about if she wins, what happens. That's the big, we say this every time we're on the show here. We're not here to predict fights, especially in DFS. The betting aspect, sure, we're trying to predict some stuff there. We're looking at undervalued bets, but in DFS, we're just trying to figure out if they win, how does it happen? What does that mean for scoring? And Kunitskaya is definitely one that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, totally.
Any other low-owned fighters that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think the last guys on the list, we've got guys like Emmers, Olenek, Vieira on the other side of that fight. Like, Vieira's really expensive, which she's the second most expensive fighter, which is why we're expecting her to be like the lowest owned favorite on the slate. I mean, she does.
That's my music when you hear the lowest owned favorite.
Right. And a big favorite. I mean, she's a negative 275 favorite. Like, she's a massive favorite, and she's going to be, we have her projected at 11%. Maybe she's as high as 15, but somewhere in that low teen range. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you're going to have a bunch. And then the other one is Charles Rosa, who, I kind of mentioned it earlier. Like, he's never scored as well. He's coming off a neck injury. He's getting older. He got dominated by Bryce Mitchell recently. He did come back with a low-scoring decision win, but really bad low-scoring decision. So I don't think many people are going to be on him. He's really expensive. He couldn't ask for a better spot here. I mean, literally, he's an armbar specialist going against a guy who's going to come out of the start like a greyhound and just fire off one after another submission. And Rosa's never been submitted. So, I mean, it's a tough matchup for Minner. So if Rosa can survive the initial onslaught, I think he has a really good chance to get a round 1 or a round 2 submission of his own. And I mean, again, he's never scored well, but I mean, this would be the time for Rosa to put up a ceiling performance if he ever was going to. And he's going to be, somewhere in the teens. So I mean, he's not going to be high owned either.
Love to hear that. And maybe he gets a couple more % with the news of Close and
right.
Pena being off.
Right.
But again, it's not going to skyrocket his ownership by any means. All right, we're here for another 5 minutes or so. If you like what you see, go ahead and click that subscribe button below. That way you get notified when all of our videos and live streams are here, published on YouTube. Give us that thumbs up. You can check out Jake's work, MMADFS.com. You can check out our work at OccupyFantasy.com. All right, Jake, any final thoughts on this slate? We haven't really talked about FanDuel too much. Favorite FanDuel MVPs, we know the key there is finding that low-owned MVP, sub 5% that has a ton of upside. We've talked about pretty much every fighter on the slate so far, but who are some of the ones you're targeting for FanDuel MVPs for tournaments?
Yeah, for sure. I think on FanDuel, you want to look at like two things. You want to look at guys that can get several submission attempts, and you want to look at guys that can get several takedowns defended, in addition to an early finish, of course. But if you can tack on those stats and then get an early finish, you're so much more valuable than someone that just comes out and gets an early finish with nothing else tacked on, like Tom Aspinall.
Right.
So I mean, I think you want to look at guys like Minner. I mean, he might come out and get like 4 or 5 submission attempts in the first round, and he's $10 because he's probably going to lose. But if he wins, he's going to put up a huge score.
Yep.
And then Olynyk too. He's kind of a 40-year older version of Minner, where he's also going to come out and put up a bunch of submission attempts. So, I mean, he has the potential to put up a big score if he can finish it. I mean, just kind of working our way up. I mean, I think some of the mid-price guys, Wineland has a really good takedown defense. So he could potentially get several takedowns defended. And if he gets a late round 1 KO on top of like 3 takedowns defended, maybe gets a knockdown, maybe gets 2 knockdowns, he could be a sneaky high scorer. Landwehr defended 12 of 13 takedowns in his last fight. He put up like 127 or something FanDuel points. I mean, that was a big score.
In a decision, right?
Yeah, in a decision. I mean, he didn't put up a huge DraftKings score, but tack on 12 takedowns defended, all of a sudden you got a massive FanDuel score. So, I mean, it's hard to just kind of focus on one. And I think as you get to the top side of the pricing, you get guys like Hawes, I mean, maybe even O'Neal if she just goes crazy on volume and racks up takedowns. I mean, Draco. I think Dawkins has potential. If let's say Olynyk shoots for 5 takedowns and Dawkins stops them all and then gets a knockout, I mean, he could put up a huge score. So, I mean, it's hard to focus on one guy, but I have several guys I'm interested in.
Yeah, and none of those you really mentioned are Blaydes, who's going to be the most popular MVP on the slate. For general good reasons, big favorite, main event favorite, has put up incredible scores. But when you talk about all these other lower owned options, it's really attractive, and you could just stick Blaydes in your flex spot, lock in the 100 points or whatever plus he gets, and have the unique MVP that has a chance to score higher at a much, much, much lower ownership. So, all right, folks, that'll do it. We are exactly at 3:30. Appreciate everyone listening here. And again, if you have any more questions, you can always hop on our Discord channel, OccupyFantasy.com/Discord. Links in the description below. You can learn how to join the Discord there. Check out MMADFS.com, the sheet where Jake every single week writes up every single fight and the betting and DFS implications. Check out OccupyFantasy.com where you can read the MMA Daily Plug, which Jake takes from his sheet, puts it into the top plays and lineup strategies for each slate. Check out our MMA Occupy model, projected ownership, and every fighter ranked for both FanDuel and DraftKings. And Jake, before we get out of here, we got to do our special parlay again. We did it last week. I got to be honest, you let us down. Me and Moose hit our 2 legs of the parlay. You lost your third leg. So let's see if we can give the people a nice 2-fight or 2-bet parlay to close out the stream. So I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I appreciate you reminding me of that, man. That was brutal. I think I had like $10 on that parlay. I threw it in while we were on the thing, and it was to win like 2,900, and just needed that Barber KO, and then she's over there punching, throwing jabs from 25 feet away. That one's gonna sting a little bit. So let me ask you a question, Brian. Do you wanna get a little bit safer, or do you wanna get a little bit crazy on this parlay?
No, we're going crazy. We're going crazy. If you want safe, you can check out the plug for some of the safer bets. But I guarantee the people watching, the degenerates watching the live stream 90 minutes before the slate locks, they want a crazy parlay. So let's give them a crazy one.
All right. If we're going to turn it up to 11, then I think my pick is going to be a Wineland round 2 KO at plus 2,000.
Good Lord. Okay. So a plus 2,000. Now I got to think
you
of
said
something.
Crazy.
Yeah. All right. So let me see here. So I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to pull up on the daily plug here. I'm going to go down to your best bet section so we can see. And again, this is every single week in the daily plug. Jake puts in his best bets. They've been profitable ever since he started posting them. Let's see. So plus 2,000. So if you see this section here, or if you really want to get crazy, this is the section where you're looking at here. So I'm going to say, do you have the odds on a Rosa first round submission?
Yeah, it's not that good. I want to say it's like 350, maybe even a hair less. I was
That
looking
seems
at
crazy
it.
Considering his, I guess considering his DFS ownership and his scores, it's kind of crazy to see that.
Yeah, I was hoping it would be a little bit better. Actually, I like the Minner side. I almost threw out Minner round 1 sub at plus 1,000, but you said get really crazy.
Yeah. I will go with. Let's think here. I'm gonna go with Imavov round 2 win at plus 900. I'm big on the Imavov today. I was talking to you before the stream. I'm getting a little crazy here and thinking about fading Halls, but maybe not with one of these fights canceled. But we'll add Imavov plus 900 to the mix in the round 2 win.
I like it.
Cool. So if you want to bet those in your state and you're in a legal sports betting state, you can check out our links here in the daily plug. Get great deposit bonuses from our partnered sportsbooks, OccupyFantasy.com. Click the MMA Daily Plug link for more information. So for Jake, you can follow him at DFS_MMA on Twitter. You can follow me at BrianJesterFF, and you can follow us at Occupy Fantasy. Good luck to everyone today. We'll be sweating in the Discord. Come join us and watch the fights with us together tonight. Good luck, and we'll talk to you soon.